here with your astrological analysis of the 2024 presidential election in the US. Yeah, astrological. I know it says prediction in the title, but you got to get people to watch. It's more an analysis than a prediction, and we'll get to the prediction, but I know you want me to spill that out right away, but no YouTube astrologer worth their salt would do that, and it won't help you if you skip to the end either. So you're either in for the duration or you're not at all. Now that we lost half the audience, let me say a couple of things to begin with over here. First of all, the basic idea of being able to predict the outcome of a democratic election is antithetical to the nature of democracy. If people don't really have choices, if people can't really make their own decisions, then democracy is a sham and we should just listen to the astrologers. And that's not a very good idea, I tell you what. On the other hand, we can note some trends and we can see what is going on. And we have to note also, too, that while individuals can make choices and steer their destiny and essentially, let's call it, get above the astrology, groups tend to, on a whole, tend to react sort of predictably. That's just psychology. There's no astrology in that. It is easier to predict group activities than individuals because individuals can have the little spark of awareness. Groups really can't. What you have to hope for, if you're on the project of democracy, is that you have enough individuals in the group for them to have the awareness to make intelligent choices and not just get swept along with things. That's got to be your hope. And I leave it to you to assess the situation as it stands. But we can sort of make some predictions according to what the groups are likely to do if we take a look at the different forces that are at work. And I'm going to go way deep. I'm going to go way deep into the forces that are at work, some of them over the course of thousands of years, then get a little bit more local into the last few decades, and then finally the last few years, and then here we are today. It seems like a long way to go, but I'll try to go through it kind of quickly and make it, okay for you. Now, there are two things that are going on at a very, very deep level that have a great deal of relevance for this election. And the first is the shift into the age of Aquarius. Leave aside the song from Help and all of that, not Help. Help had a lot of good songs. Leave aside the song from Hair and just think about the age of Aquarius as a thing in itself. Now, astrologers love to argue about when the age of Aquarius began, okay, or begins, or will begin. For me, I see it as beginning, or at least being heralded in by the discovery of Uranus in the 1780s. That seems to me to be about the time that we should be looking at, and I'll tell you why. The first thing is Uranus was eventually given rulership over Aquarius. Uranus is the sign of the planet of revolutions. It was discovered right, but the American and French revolutions. That's why the association came in. And this was the beginning of the social and political age of ideals, and that's Aquarius. Okay, so the American Revolution, the ideal of democracy. Now, it's a big story. I mean, the British had really been working on democracy for quite a long time and all of that. But this is now, it's all we got. We're just starting out with, that's all we have is the ideal. We don't have the tradition. We don't have the history. All we have is the ideal. That's a big shift. And then, of course, the French Revolution, very idealistic revolution. And ever since then, we've had a lot of ideals driving social and political history, right? We've had a lot of isms. We used to call them this in the 60s and 70s. We used to talk about isms. We have, communism and socialism and fascism. Democracy is not an ism, but, capitalism We have all of these isms, these ideals, these systems of ideals that have really taken over. We still, for a long time anyway, and to extent continuing, we have royalty, but they're not as powerful as they used to be. Everything has to answer to the ism. Everything has to answer to the ideal. We've had all kinds of dictators and strong men, and they've pretty much all been men. So, but even they have to answer to the ideal. They have to say that they're answering to the ideal. Some of them have been real awful, but they have to say that they're answering to the ideal. Royalty never had to do that. Royalty never had to say, I'm answering to an ideal. Royalty, generally speaking, the idea was that the mandate was given by God. And otherwise, the simple answer is if you're the king or the queen, you are because you are. There's no need to justify. You could do great things, you could do terrible things. Right? You could be beloved, you could be beheaded. But it was on the basis of who you are. That doesn't fly anymore. And that's because of the age of Aquarius. I mean, if nothing else, look, during the age of Pisces, the way to get around and the way to explore and the way to move things was through the seas, Pisces. And today we do it by air, right? So the age of Aquarius, where we fly around the globe and fly up into space. And even the internet is very Aquarian. It's a kind of level playing field, everybody is connected type of thing. I think we're very much in the age of Aquarius and have been for some time. Now, the Aquarian ideal of the ism, right, is very much opposed to the royal idea, the Leonine ideal of royalty. Right? And Leo is the sign of royalty. Hold on to that for a second. So we're opposite. We're opposite the Leonine vibe as we go into the age of Aquarius. And indeed, you look and see what happened to royalty. They've either been kind of reduced, their political power has been reduced. The power that they have socially and stuff remains quite strong. And they typically, they try to do some pretty good stuff with it on recognition of the fact that they also too have to answer to an ideal, right? So, but and they want to answer to an ideal, so I'm not selling them short on that, but it's a very different kind of situation that we have now with this Aquarian ideal. The other thing that has happened is that now, why was Leo the sign of royalty? We can go back into that. Well, the fixed star Regulus was in Leo for about 2,500 years, essentially the entire history of astrology as we could recognize it and know it. Not technically, but 2,500 years of astrology is a pretty long time. So Regulus was in Leo. Now, Regulus, regulator, right? That which controls things, the Regulus, the royal star, was in Leo. Okay. And we have Regulus, regulator, regulations. Also, though, regal and regent, right? They all share the same root in the sign of Leo. Now, I like to think that Regulus became the royal star because it was the big bright star in Leo. Arguably, you could say that Leo became the sign of royalty because Regulus was in the sign. But being a Leo, I don't like that explanation quite as much. Anyway, it certainly did favor royalty, and it certainly did favor that Leonine vibe. You'll look at coat of arms for royalty all over the place, and you'll always see, always, but you'll usually see lions on them, right? The idea of lion. Leo, a masculine sign, right? Leo, the sign, we would associate that, it's associated with the sun. Louis XIV had it exactly right, the Sun King, it's associated with the sun. Leo is a bright, outgoing sign. It is also the sign that we would associate with the principle I am, or the ego. And indeed, having a big ego was a pretty much the standard operating procedure for people that were in control during the time that Regulus was in Leo. I say was because around 2011, it's hard to date these things with any exactitude, but around 2011, Regulus precessed, that's due to the wobble of the earth and stuff like that. Regulus precessed out of Leo and into Virgo. Now, Virgo, now we have the royal star, the regulator. The regulator has gone from Leo into Virgo. Leo's a masculine sign, Virgo's a feminine sign. Leo is very outgoing, very I am oriented. Virgo is the sign of service. We have very, very different vibe. And we can see that there's been a real shift. And if you kind of back away from things for just a minute, if you back away from, and when we talk about social and political stuff, it's really hard to do because we're naturally all invested and we think something is right and something is wrong. But if you back away from it a little bit, you can really see how this sort of Virgo vibe has pretty dramatically started to get into our system. Some folks hate it and some folks love it, but you can sort of see how this has happened, and things have changed quite a bit. Aquarius is opposite Leo. It's literally opposite in the zodiac. Virgo is next door to Leo, and signs that are next door to each other are also, in many ways, opposite to each other. As I've already pointed out, Leo's a fire sign, it's masculine. Virgo's an earth sign, it's feminine. Right? We right away get a change, or Leo's a fixed sign, Virgo is a mutable sign. We right away see that there's a lot of difference between the signs that are next to each other. So in a way, both the age of Aquarius and the precession of Regulus into Virgo are signaling something that is opposite to the Leo 9 energy. Okay, but you say to yourself, yeah, Armand, okay, 2024 election. Come forward a little bit. Come forward a little bit into the 1960s. We had Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, conjunct Pluto, the planet of deep transformation, in the sign of Virgo. Happened right around the 1966. Right in the sign of Virgo, we had the meeting of these two planets, and the 60s were an incredibly transformative decade. Ironically, a lot of the transformation, a lot of the most creative aspects of the 1960s came from the Pluto in Leo generation, as they were operating with Pluto and Uranus in Virgo. That's interesting. That's another story, though, but just a little aside for the baby boomer generation there, the Pluto and Leo folks. They really sort of stepped up during the Pluto and Virgo years. Anyway, Pluto and Uranus meet in Virgo, and there's this kind of lifting up of the underdog. That's very much a Virgoan kind of thing, to lift up the underdog. Libra is balance, but Virgo is the lifting up thing. And of course, just to look at the United States, the civil rights movement was a very, very much a Pluto in Virgo movement. But it was followed on and built upon things like the women's movement. There's actually too many movements to just list them all, summarize them here. But definitely the women's movement was a big part of the Pluto Uranus conjunction in Virgo, and also the gay rights movement. Just the very end of Pluto in Virgo, that really took off. Interesting astrology to all of these things. But I know 2024 election, we got this on our mind. But it was a big sea change that happened in terms of social values in the 1960s. The understanding of, first, I mean, environmentalism. Virgo very much associated with the environment. Virgo very much associated with, well, Virgo is the sign of the harvest. It is portrayed with a woman holding a staff of grain, the virgin holding the staff of grain, and the myths of Demeter, Persephone, which have to do with the grain and the cycle of the year. And the also to the prominence of Ceres, really Demeter in Greek, Ceres in Roman, Latin. The prominence of these myths, I'm certainly among astrologers, but the importance of the understanding of the cycle of the year and again the environment and all the things that are changing and so on has especially since 2011, it sort of kicked off after the conjunction back in the 1960s, but after 2011, it's become very much on our minds. This is all that Virgoan stuff that we're moving towards, right? That we're recognizing. So we have this, in a way, the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in Virgo signaled the coming of Regulus into Virgo. You know, there's changes afoot, and since 2011, those have really taken off. Um, Virgo is now, it doesn't seem to those of us who have been living with Regulus in Leo, and just about all of us have been living with Regulus in Leo. Those of us with Regulus in Leo may look at Virgo as being slightly less strong of a sign. And, we're all, the fire sign, the lion, and all of the strength card in tarot is a great lesson in this, because we have I would say a figure that is fairly easily to associate with the Virgoan Virgin closing, or maybe she's opening, the lion's mouth. Who has the power there? It is not the lion. The lion is being, if not subdued, he's at least being compliant. Right? Virgo is a sign of strength, but it's a different kind of strength. And it's a subtle kind of strength. I cannot help but note that if you go back to the 50s and the early part of the 60s, most of the positions that were, well, for example, most of college graduates were men, and by far the majority of professionals were men. Today, that's reversed. Today, more women graduate higher education and more women go on to get professional degrees than men. That's a sign of the shift that has taken place. Although, of course, and it was a subtle kind of thing. It wasn't like, anybody like put their stamp on it and said, now we're going to start doing this. It was a subtle kind of thing. It is still, though, it's still working on our Regulus in Leo assumptions that it is, having, the degree and the power and the position and stuff like that. That is what really makes the difference. And I think as time goes on with Regulus in Virgo, we're going to discover that maybe things are a little bit different than we think. It's sort of grafting a new value onto an old model. 2024 election, we have to get here. I know. Okay. And then in terms of the Aquarian stuff, in 2000, we had the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Aquarius at 0 degrees of Aquarius. This happened in December of 2020. Now, Jupiter and Saturn meet together every 20 years, and they begin a cycle that has a lot to do with social, political zeitgeist. And for a long, long time, for hundreds and hundreds of years, they've met pretty much like right around the beginning of a decade, and then they get to their opposition point a decade later, and then they meet again, and 20 years after the previous meeting. For hundreds of years, they were meeting in Earth signs. They were meeting in Taurus and Capricorn and Virgo, and then in 1980, they quickly met in Libra, and then in 2000, they met again in Taurus, an Earth sign. And now they met at 0 degrees Aquarius, an air sign, and they will be meeting in air signs for hundreds of years. We're not going to get the meeting in any other sign. So, in 20 years, they'll meet again in an air sign. And that will be Gemini. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it'll be Libra. Who cares? We'll worry about that when we get there. Now I'm thinking about it. Anyways, a signal, the move from Earth to air. Even as Regulus moves from fire to Earth, the meeting of Saturn and Jupiter in air signs, in Aquarius, in the sign of ideals. Again, a big dose of Aquarian energy coming our way. At the same time, Pluto is leaving Capricorn and has been dancing back and forth, going into Aquarius, coming back into Capricorn, going into Aquarius, coming back into Capricorn, and then eventually just going into, I say eventually, but not too eventually, going into Aquarius to stay until 2043. Okay, so in both cases, the meeting of these planets in Aquarius at 0 degrees Aquarius and Pluto hovering around the degree of 0 degrees Aquarius, we're getting a strong dose of Aquarian energy. I've talked about this before, but you know, the things like the Pluto in Aquarius, essentially strongly idealistic, power Pluto to the people, Aquarius. We see things like the rise of labor unions after, in the US anyway, after decades of being dormant and despised even by workers. Labor unions are on the rise again. We see it in all the DEI initiatives that are taking place for better and for worse. We see it in things like Black Lives Matter. We see it all over the place, right? This is we got to level the playing field kind of thing. Everybody has a chance. Good ideals, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are good ideals, but so is liberty, equality, and fraternity. And sometimes, that was the last time Pluto was in Aquarius. Sometimes the ideals can kind of get the better of you. Sometimes the ideals can kind of get the better of you. So, we're not advocating one way or the other over here. And don't get the idea that the planets are either, Don't start thinking that Pluto's a Democrat or a Republican or anything like that. They have no real concern for anything like that. They are drilling much deeper holes than our little back and forth, bickering is letting us in on. So there's something going on there. But the Aquarian energy, very, very strong, very much power to the people. Regulus in Virgo, whole different set of it's not really ideals, a whole different set of power structures coming in. But Regulus is gonna be in Virgo for thousands of years. We're not exactly figuring it out in 15 years or anything like that. The same thing with the age of Aquarius. We're still rocking that boat both ways. And there's no point for either of these things where we get the end result. It's just a continual process in both cases. But okay, brought it forward now to 2020. So we're going to step back to the 2016 election, which Donald Trump won. And we have to look at why that might have been the case, right? Now, in 2016, Uranus, the Aquarian planet, was in the sign of Aries. Uranus was in the sign of Aries. Uranus in Aries, we know from the 1930s when Uranus was in Aries, Uranus in Aries favors outsiders, favors mavericks. The revolutionary energy of Uranus combined with the individualistic, here I am, warrior energy of Aries, you're looking for mavericks, you're looking for outsiders, right? That was the vibe of Uranus and Aries. Uranus was in that sign from 2011 till 2019, dancing back and forth and stuff like that. But that's roughly for your ballpark figure thing. You can think about Uranus and Aries 2011 to 2019. So this was smack in the middle of it. Also smack in the middle of it was the square, right? 2015 or so was 2013 to 2015 was the square between Uranus and Pluto. Now, Pluto, meanwhile, has been in Capricorn since 2008, grinding down and eroding the institutions, the power structures that we have, exposing what's wrong with them, bringing up the filth. That's what Pluto does. In this case, he does it to institutions, corporations, all the different power structures that we have. That's what Capricorn is. That's what Capricorn is. So Pluto's been eroding that and bringing all that up and showing us what's wrong with the system. And then Uranus is in Aries saying, here comes a maverick that's going to change things. And so the energy of the middle decade there, of the 20 teens, the energy of that was one that really brought forward people who were from the outside and somewhat extreme. Uranus particularly tends to favor folks that are a little extreme, a little rigid in their own way. Aquarius is, after all, a fixed sign. So what happened there? We have folks like Erdogan in Turkey and Orban in Hungary, and we have people who are coming in from the outside. Lulu in Brazil. We have all these folks that are coming in from the outside, people that are outsiders, people that are rather extreme, and they're getting embraced, right? And because they're pointing out the fact that the system as it stands doesn't work all that well. Do they have good solutions? Yeah, that's harder to do. But you want it to be an outsider. That was the thing. And at the 2016 election, to be honest with you, I think that Bernie Sanders would have been a better choice for the Democrats than Hillary Clinton because he was more of an outsider. He has that maverick energy. I mean, he really has that maverick energy. And it seemed to them at the time that that was too extreme, that was too far gone, that was going to be unappealing to people. But Donald Trump won. So apparently you could be pretty far to the outside and it would have worked in 2016. Now, Hillary Clinton, all she kind of had going for her as an outsider was that she was a woman. But coming on the heels of Barack Obama, that wasn't all that impressive. And she could be portrayed as an insider. Now, being an insider when it comes to politics and running a country, being an insider is not a bad thing. I mean, you would kind of want somebody with a little bit of experience driving the train, right? You think somebody who has had their hands on the levers of power for a while might be the kind of person that you would want for the job, as opposed to somebody who comes in, with lots of gusto, but not necessarily any real experience. But with Pluto in Capricorn wearing down and eroding the existing structures, being an insider was the worst thing you could be. And with Uranus and Uranus in Aries, it was so appealing to get somebody from the outside. Hence, Donald Trump won that election. Now, Donald Trump is a person who really embodies a lot of these energies. First of all, he's a Gemini, but his sun is very, very close to the planet Uranus. They're about 5 degrees away. So he embodies that Uranian energy. And, it's already in the sign of Gemini, which is a little bit flexible with things, if you get my drift. And Uranus, which is ready to make rapid changes and so on. So he really embodies that energy. But more importantly, right, he has 29 degrees Leo, and hence Regulus in Leo, because Regulus was at 29 degrees for, well, we all have Regulus at 29 degrees Leo. Let's put it that way. Unless you're very young or pretty old, you have Regulus at 29 Leo. It was there for about 70 years, ending in 2011. So we all have Regulus at 29 Leo, but he has it rising. It's his rising degree. Okay, he's 29 Leo rising. So he really rallies that energy of Regulus and Leo. And he has Mars, the ruler of Aries. Right? He has Mars, the ruler of Aries, and Uranus was in Aries. He has that rising as well. He has it like 3 degrees off of his ascendant in Leo. Quite powerful stuff. Quite powerful stuff. He really embodied that energy. He really embodied that energy. This is an important point. By 2020, Uranus had left and gone into Taurus, which we have a lot of interesting things to say about. I got a good video if you want to search the channel and read about that. But it's not particularly relevant to the presidential election. Okay. And now we come forward and we think over here, we look at Kamala Harris. And her chart, she was born at the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in Virgo. So she embodies that energy very directly. She embodies that energy very directly. And I mean, essentially, as does her generation. Anybody born between 1964 and 67 is going to have relatively the same degree of strength as this, but she's embodying that. And her Saturn, the planet of structure, the ruler of Capricorn, is at 28 degrees of Aquarius. And at 28 degrees of Aquarius, this is, first of all, opposed to the Regulus in Leo and Donald Trump's ascendant. And it does embody the Aquarian energy fairly well also. She's a Libra. And it's interesting that both Trump and Harris are Libras. It's interesting, in fact, are both air signs. He's a Gemini, she's a Libra. It's interesting. They have a lot of things in common in their charts, actually. They both have Mars in Leo, which is apparently a pretty common thing among U.S. presidents. And this Mars is coming into Leo the day before Election Day. On November 4th, 2024, Mars leaves Cancer, ingresses into Leo, the sign of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's personal Mars. And it's going to stop and retrograde back into Cancer before it gets to either of their Mars. Right? So they're waiting for their Mars return. Now, in the 6 months or so before your Mars return, typically energy is a little bit low. It's not a great time to begin something new. It's just like, it's the end of the week kind of energy. It's like, it's the Friday afternoon of the 2-year Mars cycle. It's like, it's like you kind of don't feel like it. They've both been in the end of their cycle for a while. And the end of the cycle for both of them is very much dragged out. Very much dragged out. They won't really be to their Mars returns until after the inauguration. Okay, so we see the way this is going, right? You can draw some conclusions from what I've said about Donald Trump and his chart and how it resonates, and with Kamala Harris and her chart, with how it resonates with the things that are going on. And the one thing that you have to consider, though, is that this election is going to take place not with Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto doesn't go into Aquarius until November 19th, right? And so this is taking place with Pluto at the very last degree of Capricorn. Since 2008, when he got into the sign and has been doing all his mischief to our power structures, showing us what's wrong, eroding the structures, eroding people's faith in the structures. Here he is just 2 weeks before he gets out of the sign for good, and we have this election. That is really quite telling. And I think that this election, and actually the moon on election day will be in Capricorn. It'll be, as election day begins, the moon will be right about where Pluto was in 2008 when Barack Obama won. And sometime around the time that we find out who won the election, the moon will be near Pluto at the end of Capricorn, right? And then the shift is going to take place into Aquarius. And then Kamala and Donald are going to get their Mars returns. And to me, if you add it all up, it makes it pretty clear that the winner of the election would have